It's time to wrap up the positional free agency series. Today, we're going to dive into the center market for the Pacers. Is there any reason they would want a center? If so, who? How much should they be willing to spend? What is their matters about their current roster? We'll get to all of it today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Monday. Hope you had a great weekend, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today we are finishing up the free agency previews by position for the Pacers. We've run through the first four positions. We've run through the offseason rumors so far. We've caught up on the draft, what the Pacers could look at, what their pick situation is. We reviewed all the player seasons from last year. There's one thing left to do ahead of this chaotic week that's coming. Let's talk about centers. The last position we have not talked about for the Pacers, why they would pursue one, if at all, what resources they should use on the position, if any, the best players available, the realistic fits. You know the deal. If you listen to the first four of these, going through the other positions, we just did power forwards with Ethan Krieger last week. I thought that was the most interesting one. Small forwards also with Alex Golden was fascinating. Centers and the two guard positions I'm doing by myself because they're less intriguing than the forwards, of course, but still valuable. And this is the last one of the series of the offseason. Usually there's a lot more offseason stuff to cover. Not as much time this year after the conference finals run because the draft is Wednesday. The free agency starts on Sunday. It's all coming so fast. Pacers don't pick till Thursday. But that means after today, the rest of this week will be rumors and draft stuff and more draft stuff and how it relates to free agency. And the team is changing and the teams are changing. Oh, my goodness. So today we do our last preview talking centers. And the center position has been the most discussed position for the Pacers in the Kevin Pritchard era for many reasons. Myles Turner, Sabonis, Turbonis, 3 centers, 4 centers. Here comes Goga. Here comes these other young guys. Oh my gosh, Daniel Theis is on the team now. It's been crazy to track their centers. And all of a sudden, for the first time ever, they might actually have to think about the center spot in free agency because Jalen Smith has a player option, and that's the headline of the discussion on why they could turn to this spot. Look, we can go through the entire Kevin Pritchard era, right? The second full season, he was in charge when Sabonis was still a backup. They went and got Kyle O'Quinn, right? They had a third center. They had Alize Johnson ready and TJ Leaf ready to be 4th and 5th centers if need be. The following year, TJ Leaf, Jakar Sampson still on the team, and Goga's in the mix now instead of Kyle O'Quinn. And the following year, that was the same kind of deal. Amita Brima comes in as their break glass in case of emergency center. Then Isaiah Jackson gets into the mix, and Jalen Smith gets into the mix as Sabonis goes out. Then Theis gets into the mix, right? I bring all up the history of the position to say they have always had 3 centers minimum. And I actually think that makes sense. Like, that is a position where if you don't have the necessary talent night to night in the regular season, you're in trouble. The difference is you can cover it up as your 4th option or 5th option with not a center. You don't need more than 3, right? Obviously, the year they entered the season with Theis and Turner and Jackson and Smith, that was too much, right? That's just too many bigs. And Goga, I think, was in that mix too. I can't remember how much overlap there was. So that's too many. But 2, let's just pretend for the sake of this argument for a second. If Jalen Smith just opts out and chooses another team in unrestricted free agency, then it's Myles Turner and Isaiah Jackson. That's it. That's too few, right? So there is some debate do they actually need another one? Because maybe Obi Toppin's back and Siakam has already, agreed to terms. Like, could you just go small and just say, you know what? We're happy with Turner and Isaiah Jackson. And if we need an emergency big, we'll turn to Toppin if we have them, or Siakam, or Jarris Walker, or something like that. So the no center discussion would be that. And yet, I feel like, given the history of the Pacers, they would keep someone in there, whether that's on a 2-way, like they had Oscar Tshiebwe on a 2-way last year, another center, or if they actually wanted to use their final roster spot on like a depth big to bring in. That is the strongest argument in favor of it to me. And I actually think you need like a guy, like a real 5-man to anchor down that spot if Sticks leaves. Maybe they could draft that guy. Maybe this isn't a free agency thing. Maybe they use the 36th pick on a center knowing that maybe they would lose Isaiah Jackson at some point with his free agency coming up. Turner's a free agent after this year too. Maybe you want someone you're developing in that pipeline on your team. Or maybe you get a big on a 2-year deal for the same reasons just described, even knowing they'd be your third big this year, but you want that person to know your scheme, know your system, know they fit. There are lots of reasons to actually pursue someone, even beyond the just we've seen in the Kevin Pritchard era, they want 3 centers. So that alone is a good starting point for this, is if they lose Jalen Smith, they would want a center, I think, especially one that can play multiple positions, who can also play the 4. That sounds very specific and niche. This is similar to the point guard free agency discussion where the Pacers don't need a point guard, but if they do get one that can play more than just the one is the things that make sense to them. I'll bring this guy up later, but Kevin Love, right? He's a player option with the Heat. I bet he stays in Miami. But if he does become available and Jalen Smith opts out, Kevin Love is a third big who can maybe play the 4 in a pinch. That's a great idea. But he probably wants to play wherever he goes, and he would not play on the Pacers. But I bring him up to say that kind of guy who can play the 5, who can play the 4, that makes sense to me if the Pacers are going to pursue someone at this position. But the trouble is, this could all be for nothing. If Jalen Smith opts in, they don't need a center. They have Myles Turner, they have Jalen Smith, they have Isaiah Jackson. Now, the problem is, and what the Pacers would rightfully think about, is all those guys would enter this season, the coming season, on an expiring contract. 2 of them would be entering unrestricted free agency next summer, right? So who knows if they would be back, but that would give them a lot of flux at this position. And they might already have that entering the season. They can't extend Turner's contract. They can extend Isaiah Jackson's. They cannot extend Turner's. So maybe they're willing to go small for that reason, explore their other options at the center position beyond what they have. But I still think you need someone. I still think you need size night to night in the regular season. In the playoffs, niche lineups, skill lineups, they matter a lot. They're very helpful. But the teams that were just in the finals had 48 minutes of center depth, right? Derek Lively, Daniel Gafford, sometimes Dwight Powell. On the other side, Al Horford and Porzingis. And if they needed to, they went to Tillman or Cornette or whoever, right? They wanted a big out there no matter what for various reasons. Sometimes it's because those guys match up well. Sometimes it's because having a center is valuable. You go back around earlier, similar things for the conference finals. So the Pacers uniquely tried no center late in game 4 against the Celtics. Couldn't get stops, right? It's hard to do this perfectly, but like the Nuggets have always had a backup for Jokic, and the Wolves obviously were huge. Like, you need size at some point, and specifically skilled size. And so if Sticks opts out, there's a good argument to the Pacers actually looking to the free agent center market. That said, they should not spend a lot of money on it because they have Toppin, or they could have Toppin, excuse me. They have Toppin's rights. They have Siakam agreed to. They have Jarris Walker, right? These are resources that they should be putting to the 5 at times, but they do need someone who can actually play the position in a pinch if Jalen Smith is not on the team next year. And that's a reasonable possibility. It's been reported that he is leaning towards opting out right now by Michael Scott on Hoops Hype. We'll talk more about these reports in the future. And so as they look at the center market right now, they should not at this moment be looking so hard at centers. But if they lose Jalen Smith, they should be. And it should be something they look at with their 15th roster spot using whatever resources they deem fit, which shouldn't be a very strong one, unless they can get an awesome player who could be a center of the future, which seems very unlikely. But in order to talk about that, we'd have to look at the top of the market, the best centers available. Is there anyone good enough to actually make them think about their future at this spot? But can they even get that player? These players, it's kind of a weak year, but we've got to run through the top centers available and if they make any sense for the Pacers before we get to any of that, though. Let's talk about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time. You get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash, with all the parts you need at the prices you want. It's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. We are back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today on this lovely Monday. Second listen should be Locked On Women's Basketball, Could be any variety of things any day over there, but I was just at Fever Sky in Chicago on Sunday. Awesome game. Sky squeaked it out. But women's basketball, awesome moment they're having. W's been awesome this season. Check it out. And I'll be on there every so often, including last Monday, if you want to catch up on the Fever as their season progresses. We're talking Pacers here and their center position, which could be the same. Could be 2 years in a row of Turner, Smith, Jackson, but Jalen Smith has the power to change that. He can go the player option. He's unrestricted free agency if he opts out. That's a lot of options for him, and the Pacers have no say over any of it. But they do have front court depth. They do have front court pieces if they get to that point. That said, if they have to turn to the free agency market, what does the top of this group look like? Well, this is a good year for the Pacers not to need a center. And even if they keep Obi Toppin, they already have low resources in general. But using significant resources on a center, if it's not a starting center, is bad in the NBA. It's not something that happens very often, right? Even the very, very best backup centers make less than $10 million. Al Horford made less than $10 million this year, and he's probably the best backup center in the NBA who would start for like every other team. And I bring that up to say the Pacers should not be using their mid-level exception on a backup center when they already have Isaiah Jackson and Myles Turner under contract for next season as of right now. So the best guys available don't really matter to the Pacers unless they view that guy as one of the following. Someone who can play not just the five. So they would play with Turner at times, or they could play with the second unit in various spots or whatever, or someone who would, in theory, be their starter in a few years, right? So it's a strange spot, though, because that player would not be their starter over Myles Turner this year. I don't think any free agent center is better than Myles Turner this year. That is the status of this free agency class at this position. There's one player that some could debate. We'll get to that in a second. But it's not a good top-end class. And so there's not a lot of value in using high-end resources. To be clear, only 2 centers got more than the non-taxpayer mid-level exception last summer in free agency. That was Jakob Poeltl, great starter, good defender, and Brook Lopez, who both got between 20 and 25 million per year. I think a little less than 20 for Poeltl. Everybody else got 8 million or less average annual value, right? So unless you're a stud center, you're not getting paid very much. And so it's kind of unique looking at the top of the market to see what's even out there and can the Pacers even get him. So to me, the best available free agent at this position is Nick Claxton. Nick Claxton is very good. I think he's going to get close to, if not more than, Brook Lopez money from someone. The Nets should make themselves that team. And yet, I think a lot of teams, OKC, Orlando, lots of teams would be much better with Nick Claxton on their team, right? A 12-10 guy, finishes well around the rim, led the league in 2-point percentage 2 years ago, and effective field goal percentage. Top 10 in defensive player of the year voting 2 years ago. Very good player, very impactful defender, very mobile, can switch out. He can guard fours, and I only say that to say that you could play. You don't want to play Nick Claxton at the 4, right? That would be bad for your offense. But you could get away with like a couple of utility possessions of him defending at the 4. Very good player. He's going to get a lot of money. In theory, if you would take a 4-year MLE, I would obviously offer it as the Pacers, even though it'd be clunky. He might start in the future, depending on what happens with Myles Turner. Turner's better than him to me right now, to be clear. But Nick Claxton's the best free agent center. Wonderful season the last 2 years, has clearly become an established starter in the league. And that's why the Pacers probably can't afford him. And after that, everyone else, I think everyone else is going to be MLE or lower, except for one guy who just does not make sense for the Pacers because he can't play the 4. But I think everyone else is MLE or lower. The only other no doubt starter is Isaiah Hartenstein, who's an early bird free agent. Likely the Knicks are going to be hoping that their early bird offer can keep him. And if not, he could, OKC's been floated around for him too. Beast. I mean, the Pacers just saw what he can do in the postseason. He would be a great, at some point, starter for the Pacers, but not better than Turner. He will probably make more than the Pacers can offer. Everyone else is not worth it. Jonas Valanciunas, Rashawn Holmes could be a free agent if he opts out, but that would be stupid of him. Those are the two who made the most last year. They were both over $10 million a year on their last deal. Everyone else was below that. And so it's just not a very strong class of centers. I still see some stuff in James Wiseman that I'm like, maybe that's interesting, but clearly not a good player yet. And a player like him, who made almost $10 million last year. He probably just wants to play. He would not play on the Pacers, right? Mo Wagner's a good player. He might be playing for the Pacers. He's definitely going to be with the Magic. He's a team option. And everyone else is a pretty clear deep reserve. Daniel Tice, he's probably, he was with the Pacers last year, obviously, for a time. That makes it's not a good top end group. Andre Drummond's a good player. So to be clear, there's a lot of guys who would make good backups on the Pacers. They might be a little better than Isaiah Jackson, but is that worth investing to pay to have a third center better than Isaiah Jackson? Probably not. That does not seem like good asset and cap management to me, unless it's the no doubt awesomest, best backup center, best fit of all time kind of player. But I don't see that player on this market. Unless Nick Claxton's willing to be a backup five. He is not, to be clear. So that's where this is really tricky. The best players on the market make no sense for the Pacers and would not have a role and aren't worth very much to most teams. They're incumbent teams or where they make a lot of sense. And then the young guys who you'd in theory squint and say, oh, they could throw a flyer at Tristan Vucevic or Mo Bamba, who's not that young anymore, or Jackson Hayes, interesting guys. Moses Brown I love, even though he's not that awesome. Amias Cade I kind of like, these young guys, but they wouldn't play. Why would they take the Pacers' money, right? What is their incentive to come to Indiana unless it's the only guaranteed money they get? So it's tough to find the right best players on the market for the Pacers because the best players on the market, Claxton and Hartenstein, just aren't going to be available. They're going to hit the market and they're already out of the Pacers price range and they wouldn't start anyway and they just make no sense. So the best players are not options for the Pacers. The best players that are options for the Pacers are in a unique spot where they probably wouldn't play for the Pacers because this is a weak free agency class or guys that are looking for a role that is super obvious and significant and maybe demanding of money. And the Pacers can't offer that unless they somehow trade Isaiah Jackson and lose Jalen Smith. So this is a very, very peculiar spot for the Pacers to be in. And this kind of is similar to some other positions we've talked about and speaks to the Pacers' depth. Because at that point, if you're the Pacers, if this is your reality, why would you sign someone other than just a vet who knows they're not going to play? That is a valuable player to have, to be clear. We'll talk about, but for example, DeAndre Jordan, he's probably not the perfect example. Thomas Bryant with the Heat last year, right? He's not a vet per se, but has been around the block, has won a championship, is a fine player, and yet doesn't play. He only played 38 games for the Heat last year. But if they had to play him, that's fine. They can live with that. He shot 65% on twos last year. He takes some threes. He's a fine player, right? That's like a third big. That's what you want. Someone in that situation who's comfortable not playing, but if they play, you feel good about it. So what are those realistic targets for the Pacers? Since the top end guys are impossible, and since their situation with Turner and Jackson, as it currently stands, does not permit them to add a third big. What would be available to them? What makes sense? Let's run through some names that make sense, some names I like that could actually fit this billing or could do that two positional stuff we talked about earlier with Kevin Love. Before we get to any of that, though, we've got to talk about FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down in the NBA and the NHL, we get fewer games. Baseball rolling. We got to wait for football to come back. The WNBA is still rocking, though. So the sports are not sportsing as much right now. And yet, FanDuel keeps the sports going whenever you want. All you got to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every single day, all summer long. To sign up and get those daily boosts or bonuses, head to FanDuel.com/lockdown. Start making the most out of your summer on FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Back here on Locked On Pacers, let's wrap up our chat about centers, realistic targets on the free agency market. Thanks for making us your first listen today. And every single day your second listen should be Locked On Kings. Matt George will have the latest on the second player to agree to terms in free agency under the new rules. Pascal Siakam was first. That was fun for you guys listening to this and for me to dive in for an hour of me talking to myself about Siakam agreeing to terms early. Malik Monk to the Kings. Early bird, 3+1. Malik Monk. Good stuff to get a 3+1. Kings, good stuff to keep a guy that you were limited on offers for. That's a win-win for everybody they move on. The Kings need to make a bigger move now. Not bigger moves. The Pacers centers in free agency. This speaks to the Pacers' depth of their team, right? After agreeing to Siakam as of right this second, including Kendall Brown's non-guarantee, Pacers have 12 players under contract. That includes Jalen Smith. Even if Smith opts out, they still have Haliburton, Siakam, Turner, Nesmith, McConnell, Mathurin, Walker, Jackson, Shepard, Nembhard. Those are all guys who could/should play. There's not a lot of depth or opportunity available. And so that's what's made these so interesting and why a lot of these discussions end up at this point, where it's who, if the Pacers needed someone at any position, including center, who would be the fit of, would want to come to the Pacers and accept the role they have to offer, isn't too good to demand minutes, isn't too young to want more money, and it would actually help if they played, right? Because like James Johnson is wonderful for the Pacers in that he's an awesome vet, right? They love him so much they've given him 5, maybe more than that, contracts in the last 2 seasons. Like they want him around all the time. He does not fit the playing bill, and that's fine. But at the center spot specifically, they do want someone, if Jalen Smith opts out in particular, they would want someone that can play, that can actually hit the hardwood every so often and play. Remember when they needed Amita Brima in the rotation? They were so injured a few years ago. Like that can happen at center. That can happen in a lot of positions, but that can really happen at center. And so finding someone who meets all the sweet spots is hard, because if I'm the Pacers, I'm not using my exceptions on a center, right? There's just not a good center market this year. I can get somebody for the minimum. I'm probably going to try to, if I have to, for the Pacers. So who makes sense? Who fits this bill of, would take guaranteed money, would not suck if called upon, but would be okay with not playing every game? That's kind of the role Tristan Thompson, former Pacer, just had for the Cavs, except he ended up playing in the playoffs kind of well, right? Does that make sense? JaVale McGee, former gold medalist. Does that make sense? He's probably in that spot now because he was behind not only Sabonis, but also Alex Len, who's also a free agent. He's 31, but he probably thinks he should play somewhere, right? And that's where this gets hard. Daniel Tice, Mason Plumlee, only one of you can be the backup center with the Clippers. I don't know if Tice would come back to Indiana. Plumlee, though, ties to the state, maybe that one, right? There's a lot of names I could throw around. And so the trouble is finding the exact perfect fit of all of these factors. Mason Plumlee might want to be in rotation. He was entering last season. So we're already at a tricky part. Like Andre Drummond, too good. He wants to play. He's a good player. So who makes sense? Tristan Thompson kind of makes sense. Another Haliburton connection. Here's one that will be the thumbnail of this that I kind of like if Jalen Smith opts out. Cody Zeller. Indiana ties, obviously. Many Indiana ties for Cody Zeller. Cody Zeller is certainly at a stage of his career where not playing every day. Not playing many days. In fact, for the Pelicans last year, he played 43 games. The year before that with the Heat, he played 15, although he got signed March 1st that year. The year before that, he played 27 for Portland. Clearly at a kind of late career stage for Cody Zeller. 7.4 minutes per game last year. Isn't that exactly what this Pacers team would want? That kind of size of a role. Did he even hit 500 minutes last season? 320. He's hit 500 the last 2 seasons total. He played in the playoffs for Miami 2 years ago, so that's misleading. But still, you get the gist. He actually played more playoff minutes for Miami than regular season. Oh, that's not true, but it's very close. Like he can, I bring that up to say he can give you something. He is still kind of that perfect sweet spot of like, oh, if you have to rely on, the turns 32 October 5th, 32-year-old Cody Zeller for a couple of minutes, that's fine. That would be because Myles Turner's hurt or Isaiah Jackson's hurt, or you don't want to go small against whatever matchup. But like that's the sweet spot, that level of player, that experience of player, that kind of guy. Is there anyone else like that? Because there's a lot of guys who probably are too good for that or think they're too good and are like, hey, I should play. Wherever I go, I should be in a rotation, right? Or, hey, I'm trying to chase a title now or whatever, right? It's really hard to find guys who fit that category in every single way. That's why Zeller is such an interesting fit to me. Here's one, Bismack Biyombo. He might be too good for this, but he got snatched up by a couple teams last year and didn't end up sticking in Memphis, didn't play very much in OKC. If the Pacers keep Oscar Tshiebwe, I think that could be interesting because Tshiebwe and Biyombo have a prior relationship. 10 games with the Thunder last year, Bismack Biyombo played. Right, he is kind of in maybe that sweet spot. He might might want to play wherever he ends up. But there's a lot of guys who are young and would want minutes. Does Taj Gibson make sense? He's been playing for teams, Detroit, New York, in recent seasons. Mike Muscala is probably too good for this. I think Mike Muscala is actually a good player. There's just not a lot of guys that check every box. Chimezie Metu, maybe. Xavier Tillman, fresh off a title. He probably wants to play. He's only 25, right? There's just not a lot of players that check every single box. Zeller does, or at least gets pretty close. Taj Gibson does, or at least gets pretty close. You could maybe say JaVale McGee does, or at least gets pretty close. It's kind of it. And so if you get to that point, if you're the Pacers, you just say, we'll play Obi at the 5. We'll play Jarris. We'll play Pascal or whatever. Do you draft someone at 36 or 49 or 50 and you're happy with that? Do you just promote Sheboy at that point? You just say, Oscar Sheboy, you are now the third 5. Congratulations. So there are routes to go. I would think they'd want a vet and someone who can play. They're not in development mode anymore. Maybe they like Sheboy enough to do that. He was obviously an amazing rebounder in the G League last year. But I'd be very curious what that would look like, because this is a position they need. They could need someone at if Jalen Smith opts out. As Michael Scott reported, is the early indication. We don't know yet. We won't know till later this week. But if Jalen Smith opts out, they will need a center, or they will need to at least look at signing a center. But the market stinks and does not have a lot of very obvious, this guy fits every box for the Pacers and actually makes sense to somebody who would take that role and take that much money from them. So all this to say, kind of like point guard, not expecting a big flurry here. If the Pacers actually do sign somebody, it'd probably be a minimum deal, maybe not even a fully guaranteed minimum deal. You try to survive January without a center until the trade deadline is passed and deal with it then. There's lots of ways that this could go. The draft could change everything I said. But this position does not seem like a priority for the Pacers for lots of reasons, unless they make a trade, which we have no inkling of right this second. That is the end of the free agency by position series. Wings, 4s, 2s, 1s, and now 5s are all done. And now it's time for the madness. The draft is Wednesday, so tomorrow we'll talk some rumors, the latest offseason stuff. I alluded to some Jalen Smith stuff. There's also some TJ McConnell stuff, some Jarris/Obi stuff. Interesting. We'll run through some mock drafts. Then Wednesday, we'll preview the draft. Wednesday night/Thursday, we'll talk about what happened in the first round, of how it affects the Pacers, best prospects left. Thursday, we'll talk about what the Pacers did. And Friday, we'll meet some prospects. And it'll be time to talk about what it all means for free agency. You know the deal. There's so much fun stuff coming here on the Locked On Pacers podcast. Thank you all for listening today. I hope you learned something. Or if you have an idea about a center the Pacers should get, let me know. I'm at Tony R. East on Twitter. And the show is there at Locked On Pacers. You can comment down below on YouTube. Lots of people have thoughts on Andre Drummond, but I don't know. Would they if they did that, they should just trade Isaiah Jackson immediately. So it's a very interesting spot. Let me know what you think. Back tomorrow, talking rumors as the Pacers offseason reaches that point, and then it's draft time. Hope you all enjoyed today's show. Have a wonderful day. See you very soon.